Are you ready for more depth psychological analysis?
Yes. Maybe this will help us ward off Alzheimer's.
Well, yeah, they do say continuing education is a good. I don't know whether that's an old wives' tale or not, but
No, it says it makes new connections.
Do things differently than like go to the grocery store and do it backwards instead of a regular routine that you just anything you can do to shake up your mind.
Sitting in different spots.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
Let's see where you sit next.
Yeah.
review. We talked last time about integration of a projection into the I should warn you, you're going to be competing with my nose this morning. Integration of projection into the ego or self. I'm not sure that was totally clear, but we'll keep that question open. It's a big idea that some projections you can get control of, you might say. Other projections, they become complexes, or you begin to recognize they come from complexes that are not able to be integrated into the ego. They're part of the self. And so what the integrated state is knowing you got that inner figure that you constantly have to be in relationship with. We talked about the difference between passive and active projection. Active projection is what they called empathy. I found the words confusing, but maybe just so you remember that he considers empathy a type of projection where you lodge part of your own experience in the other person, but a healthy form of projection. We talked about bewitching. That is, a projection can be so strong that you actually identify with it and assume the role that the other person sees you as having. So if somebody thinks you're nasty, you end up being nasty. Somebody thinks you're nice, you end up being nice.
It's part of what we do to our kids.
It's definitely what how you mess up a kid. And I think, and it's part of all relationships. And yet, I think part of this is to be able to at least try to be aware of what you are projecting, and then to be aware of what's projected onto you that you don't identify with. We talked about projections and projectiles, that often in dreams the process of projecting is symbolized by shooting. Often bullets. I don't think arrows somewhat, but arrows more have to do often with, finding a goal and reaching a goal. But shooting bullets. We talked how the self can project. And that, what she's going to be doing now from time to time is taking this basic argument and then extending it to many different possibilities, more in the spirit of, if we take this tool of projection, can we find its dynamics operative in other places? So one of the things she talks about is, does the self project? Or in theological language, does God project? Why do bad things happen? Is that a projection of God? This is just speculation. Something she mentions on page 23, which we'll take up if we get to the next chapter today, I think we will. Gods as projections. This gets into the whole business of religion and projection. And then that idea, page 24, that complexes project on us. And I brought along a dream. I don't remember, speaking of Alzheimer's, did we talk about it? Did I read you the dream of the complex projecting last week? I don't think I did I? Here's a dream of what that looks like. Complex is projecting on us. This comes from a woman who, I think probably she would say her basic issue was compulsively pleasing, not standing up for herself, not being able to stand up for herself. And then I think this dream is behind that, and it's an example of where complexes project on us. I'm visiting a college community. Does this sound familiar?
You did.
I did do that? Yeah. Okay. There are coffee houses, but the thing is, the man has mistaken her for another person. So that's there's something in her that is seeing her differently than who she is. We got Mary Kay's coming. We'll have to move. I'll put one chair up here. Let me move this a little bit. Well, we got enough room there? Okay.
Gary, could we say then that the anima shadow also projects on
Yeah,
us?
yeah. Again, see, what she's doing, she's taking this basic idea of projection and just kind of milking it for what it's worth in all situations. And when we see a dream figure saying to us we're somebody other than who we are, then she says, well, look, complexes project too. In this case, the woman was raised by parents who didn't see her. But then those parents became something inside herself. And that thing inside herself continued to try to get her to be somebody else.
But that could work in a positive way, too, is that you don't see yourself as you really are, and the inner could be projecting who you really are onto
could.
you. So it's really sticky to try to figure that out.
Yeah, it's very sticky. And
probably a positive. I mean, wasn't it in the sense that
no, this was negative.
Oh, was it negative?
Yeah.
Oh, I was thinking that he showed her
No, I mean,
part of herself that could have stood up against
or
was not a pleaser.
no, because, well, yeah, that could be, but in the dream, remember, she finds a woman and her aunt's body is then exhumed at the end of the dream. And her aunt was somebody who stood up for herself. That's positive, but that comes after she tells off the guy who doesn't see her as she is. And then what we'll take up today, speaking of sticky, is subjective and objective level. That's page 25. And part of the problem of this whole business is, how do you know when you're projecting? It's terribly difficult. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it's not so obvious. Dreams are somewhat of a help, but even dreams can be confusing. And the bottom line is feeling, and then trial and error.
You mean using your feeling function to try to figure it out?
Yeah, that the ultimate guide is, well, it feels like a projection or it feels like reality. But that, of course, is highly subjective and certainly prone to error. Okay, so far? So, bottom of 25. How do we know in dreams whether we're dreaming of the other person or we're dreaming of what we are projecting onto the other person? That's the big question. That's parallel to, how do I know when I'm projecting? How do I know when I'm seeing who the other person really is? And there is no real answer to that question other than a few hints. So that now we're on page 26. What she says is if the image that we've got in the dream is grossly different than the way that person behaves in reality, you can think of projection. But even that's confusing, because if you're projecting on the person, you won't think that the image in your dream is different than the person really is, because you're already colored by that dream image. That's where I think that's kind of the job of the therapist, to try to get a sense of who each of these people are, and then help raise the question, could this be a projection or could this be reality?
Gary, wouldn't you get a much more resistance to the projection?
Not necessarily. If your relationship to that person is already a projection, and you're dreaming of who they really are, you may want to hang on to the projection and not really see who they are. She tells a story of, is it on that page, of a guy who was engaged, and he kept dreaming of his fiancée as a hooker, and in fact she was a hooker. If he needed to idealize that woman, then that hooker message would be seriously resistant.
I guess what I should have said was you would get resistance to breaking the projection.
You definitely get resistance to breaking any projection. And when you break a projection, what generally happens?
Depression.
Depression, yeah. So that was page 26. Now, it gets more complicated. If you are projecting onto somebody and they are in fact what you are projecting, that's when it gets complicated. That makes sense?
I mean, you're saying that our projection is really the truth of that person?
When our projection is really the truth of that person. In other words, I have a friend who's actually very nice. I say, oh, my friend's a creep. That's a projection that does not fit the friend. There, it's pretty easy. The other case being that the friend is a creep and I don't know it. I might dream that my friend's a creep, and that's a reality situation. It could be that my friend is a creep, and I'm a creep too, but I see my creepdom in my friend. Generally, what she's talking about on page 27 doesn't emerge in that situation. It more emerges if it's a positive projection. If my friend is smart, and I have a capacity for intelligence, which I haven't developed, then I'm projecting something onto my friend which I already have. And you might say, so why bother trying to figure that out if the projection fits the friend? Because you need to find out what your energy investment is in that person. And to take responsibility maybe for a gift that you have that you are admiring somebody else for having, and then to make that gift something real in life. Does that make sense? Are you sure it makes sense? Okay? That's what she says on page 27. That's what she sums up there at the bottom of 27. the inner mental image, about 6 lines up from the last full paragraph. The inner mental image, the object must be recognized as an inner factor. This is the only way in which the value or the energy invested in the image can flow back into the individual. That's what I was trying to get at.
Now, I would guess that the admiration has to create some disturbance. It isn't just it, but in yourself, if it wants to be recognized in yourself, right? So it's not just solely admiration. It's them going, oh, feeling deficient in some way, too. I mean, because there's lots of people we can admire, but not feeling deficient.
Yeah, and remember, I think there's 2 things you have to remember all through this course, which we started out with. One, the definition of projection. We had 2 definitions. And the other are the stages of withdrawal or projection, which we'll get back to today. But remember, the definition was a disturbance in the archaic identity between subject and object. And I would say, apropos your question, Ann, if it doesn't bother you that you're projecting, then you really resist the thing. So just going up to somebody who's a happy carrot and saying, you know, your admiration of that person is your own projection. You probably will not get anywhere until they get into a situation where they start to stumble over the very fact of their projecting or consequences of what they're projecting. And it's also why we shouldn't go around telling other people what their problems are. Because if it doesn't bother them, let them be. Now,
Gary, is that the part that difficult moral task makes it impossible for any relatively conscious person to want to improve other people in the world? That is that part. That's why.
Yes, I was going to look at that sentence. I don't totally agree with that sentence.
I'm glad. I'm not very conscious because I want to change everything.
Well, that might be something to think about. I think it's true when you get some insight into your own mess. It does take some edge off of self-righteousness. Now, this is really something I want to work on. Her idea of wanting to improve the other people in the world. You know, as I think I mentioned before, and I'm not sure I found it, but I think I found the text. It's in a video of Ron France saying that Jung realized that he only investigated the psyche internally. And he knew, really starting with synchronicity, that the psyche exists externally. Otherwise, how could you have an image in the outer world? And that he realized that was an incomplete feature of his psychology. And he also hoped that subsequent generations would take up that problem. How is the psyche more than just internal? And I think that bears on this statement that it seems to me that if you are working on a particular complex, that it is not invalid to want to change that in the world as well. And that's one of the errors of saying the psyche is only internal, and the error of her statement is really saying the psyche is only internal.
And yet, you said that if 97% of the evil is in the other person, you're still better off working on it.
I don't agree with that either. For me, it's an either-or. And I don't see why it can't be a both-and. But what I think it leaves us with, and actually it leaves us with as much responsibility as what Jung wants to put on us, is if you're going to be working in something in the outer world, make sure you're working on it in yourself at the same time. That's where I come down with it. And I think, and it's something I really intend to work on this problem. I think that complexes don't only have a personal significance. They also, what is wrong with you is an example of what's wrong with the world. And the complex actually wants you to work on the world, but not as a substitute for working on yourself. And this is one of those things I think Jung did not explore, but which I would like to try to understand. And I've seen it in so many dreams where, over the years, maybe 10, I would say, where the inner figure wants to have an effect on the outer objective world. That isn't necessarily just the dreamer's world. It's the larger world. You know, somebody starts learning to write and has a dream of inviting people into her dining room to learn to write. How would you take that subjectively? See, it doesn't make any sense. I saw a dream last week of a guy who's quite a talented artist, and the dream was his anima came to him and said, I forget exactly what it was. Something like, I want to have recognition too. And I took that to mean something in him wants a relationship with the world and to be recognized for it. So this guy's sort of an Emily Dickinson. People would just write and be happy, you know. I said, look, the unconscious wants that thing out there. So that would be my answer to that statement.
But that would be a very dangerous point when you're trying to look at changing the world, because you can get an inflation.
Yeah. And what all the pitfalls are would be something to try to understand. But I think my basic problem with that sentence is it's either or. You either work on yourself or you're working on the world. I don't see why you can't do both at the same time. And even I think the complex may want you to do both at the same time. Which I think is what's so horrible. Of course, it depends on the situation, but what's so horrible with our mania to medicate depression. You know, the world is a messed up place. Maybe you should be depressed. And maybe the depression is trying to get you to address those issues in the world as well as in yourself that need to be changed. So by medicating ourselves, we're just killing the extroverted purpose of the complex. People say, well, why is the current generation so apathetic about politics? Because they're all Prozac. It kills the importance of the complex in finding a place in the world. So these are my thoughts.
I didn't take it as either or.
Okay.
I just think the focus, I think she was just saying the focus should be on your inner, on you first, and then who knows what effect it'll have on the outside world. It might be 1 or 2 people, or it might be 500, but that shouldn't be our focus. So, you know, the material we can work with is our own.
I think you probably have got to start with yourself. There I agree.
And I don't know, I just didn't take that as either or, but you know,
Or maybe it's also like with Zarathustra, he was so bombastic that he didn't do any of that. He didn't do any of that work himself, so then it's also hard for anyone to hear it.
Yeah. And I think, you know, just societally, this is my own 2 cents, that we're getting so out of touch with our social conscience. And there are 2 errors. One, that all you do is look at your own belly button and you don't worry about the world. And the other is you worry about the world and you don't look at your own belly button. I don't know which is worse, but in a way they're the same. I think both of them are castrations. So. So in a way, she then clarifies the issue on page 28. Nevertheless, experience has shown that dreams often warn the dreamer in a very realistic way. And that's where she tells the example of the prostitute. See, there you could say, well, has he got a prostitute in himself? But that would be dumb to have him transform the inner prostitute while he's marrying a prostitute. Mm-hmm. And that image, interestingly, comes up a lot about guys who have dreams of women who are prostitutes. And it's usually not about sex. It's about their prostituting their own values to get ahead in the professional world. But it would be a great mistake to say, like, okay, we're not going to worry about your girlfriend. We're going to talk about how you are cheating in business.
Could you say, Gary, that it would be likely to be both objective and subjective, but which one you need to take care of first?
Yeah, exactly.
Because why would you be attracted to this woman?
Yeah, I think in general you're right. Could there be a situation where there isn't an inner prostitute and he's attracted to an inner prostitute? I think I'd have to keep the door open for that possibility as well. But probably, you end up in the mess you need. And as she says, and I think I can't emphasize this enough, go to that last paragraph on 28, before projection and loss of soul, possession and loss of soul. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Recognizing when and which dream images point inward and which point outward is a delicate and uncertain matter. Okay, on that, basically it just says it's a big issue, good luck. And try to figure it out. But I think we have to be aware that it is an issue when working with dreams.
Well, and then, like you said at the beginning of this, I mean, the feeling function is probably our most helpful tool in trying to recognize which one to work on first and which one to focus on.
And also she mentions in there somewhere the judgment of others. That's not infallible, though, as I mentioned, that you would have gotten all of Germany saying Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a criminal. And yet they were the criminals and he was the honest one. He's one of the guys who was executed in the plot to kill Hitler. He was a theologian. But I think in general, the judgment of the environment is something we have to listen to. If everybody says, well, she's a sweetheart, that's worth listening to. But not always. I can think of a situation where a guy I was talking to said, I don't know why I can't get along with my wife. Everybody loves her, and she's just the most wonderful person. I think I told you about this woman. And he then came down with cancer, and she, a melanoma, and she was getting more and more upset that he was getting independent and demanded to see me. And came in and told me what an idiot I was and a bunch of other things. And on the way out the door, as I closed the door, I had a stabbing pain in my shoulder, and I grabbed it. It was the same place as his melanoma. So the whole world was saying she was wonderful and she was a killer. His body knew it was a killer, and my body knew it was a killer. So almost for every rule I give you, be aware there's an exception. But this, I think, to know what a gray area it is very helpful here.
So could you say in that situation, Gary, that the two of you were tuned into her unconscious, which was killing him, and her projections on him, whereas the rest of the world who knew her at a distance more was tuned in just to her.
Mm-hmm. As it turned out, they divorced, thank God. But only after she demanded he stop seeing me, and he did. And really, I think if he had continued, she would have sued me. She was just a hateful person. And but he got out, he terminated, and then I saw him later. He since has divorced her. I didn't say good riddance, but I said it inside. But, you know, again, these things are so tricky.
But probably the general rule there would be, if a person is unwilling to look at any possibility that they are involved in it or have contributed to the situation,
right?
Then, really, that almost doesn't.
Never once said, "Geez, what's my role here?" Yeah, but rather you. That when you see finger pointing, you can think of projection. Possession and loss of soul. Those of you in the medical profession might find this chapter particularly interesting because she gets into looking at what was projection in shamanism. That's where she starts out. As you may know, the shaman often will call up, and this is in the primal mind, call up the spirit that is causing the disease. Take that spirit inside them, then or ascend up a tree. I think they literally climb up a tree or climb up on top of a house and do battle with that spirit that's causing the disease. And of course, the whole goal is for the shaman to win over the spirit. And when the shaman beats the spirit, the person is healed. If the spirit beats the shaman then gets the sickness that the person had. So it's kind of a risky business, being a shaman. But I wonder how much in medicine, without even knowing it, this is going on, that something of that disease projects itself outward, lodges itself in the doctor or the nurse, and then you've got to deal with the disease in yourself that person's got, or you're going to get sick. I think the same is true for my kind of work, though we're not dealing with the body, we're dealing with the psyche. But think of that woman who gave me a sore shoulder. That projection lodged in my body, and her projections on to her husband lodged in his body, and gave him a carcinoma, I would say. So that's what's going on sometimes in healing. In primal language, the spirit jumps out of the person into somebody else, and then you're stuck with it. And then you've got to heal in yourself what was once in the other person. In psychological language, this thing is projected.
I think that's more likely to happen if the healer has some susceptibility to a particular complex or something related to that underlying disease?
Maybe, or, I think the coldness of the medical profession, present company excluded, is a protection against this. Mm-hmm. And nurses and doctors who care are more vulnerable. I think that's where I would go with it.
And on the flip side, you've got some of those nurses and doctors, again, present company excluded, who are sick themselves, who can project sickness onto people, and that's kind of stuff too.
Definitely. Yeah. Again, present company excluded. Really, I've known nurses that by the end of the conversation, there's something wrong with me. They have to have something wrong with the people in their environment so they can fix them. I really haven't felt that with you, Ian, honestly. But I do know people like that. And
it surprised me, though.
And, from the nurses I work with, and, I don't think it's a secret that the atmosphere and the wards aren't always positive in the staff. This is what's going on.
But then that kind of gets into the power complex?
Yeah, you look at it from the conscious point of view, you'd say it's a power complex. I don't think that's incorrect. But really, remember, we don't make projections. Projections are made, and this thing just happens. So that the nurse, I've seen it more with nurses and doctors. The nurse just needs somebody around to cure. And there's nothing wrong with that, except if you're healthy, they'll make you sick so they can cure you. That's where it gets to be a problem. So there's these projections of illness going on, and as I said, if it were conscious, I don't see a problem with it. It may be the nature of the healer, that the healer, I don't think I could survive if I couldn't do my work. But hopefully I don't make people sick so I can cure them. But so this projection of illness isn't wrong, but it should match the situation that it's being projected on.
I think when you were talking about the shaman and fighting the evil spirit, I went to a conference, and one of the pieces of the conference was about compassion fatigue and how you really have to do something physical to combat compassion fatigue, because he didn't use the word projected, but it was mostly for social workers, but it apply equally to nurses.
Yeah.
All of this heavy stuff gets laid on you, and then you go home and you're exhausted, and if you don't physically fight that off with something, it does stay. So that's...
Absolutely.
It's almost like it has to attach itself to something.
Yeah. And I think that there is a lot of compassion fatigue. You see that much misery and death, but then you have the other side of that, which is the bureaucracy fatigue, where you're all fighting each other and the system. And
is that a word, or did you just make it up?
No, it is a word.
It's a word. That's a good word.
And it's so I don't know how that. I think that's a lot of projections on each other and how that takes on a life of its own. But how those all work in with projections, I'm sure is an important thing that I don't know.
Yeah, that bureaucracy fatigue, that's an interesting idea. I never heard that before. And I wonder if it's a defense against compassion fatigue.
Well, I see that as, in corporations, you could have named it that, but we've got all these tools, this technology, and some people are trying to fight it, some people are trying to control it, and so it's all the power, complex gets, because it is out of control, really. It's like it's running for us. The bureaucracy of it all, the computer systems, and it is telling, it dictates what you can and cannot do, or how you do your job.
Yeah, how many times has a person said, "Oh, the computer won't let me do that"?
Right, exactly. It's great. Yeah,
There's a show in Britain, the computer says no.
Well, you see how far you can take this concept pretty quickly. What are we projecting onto the computer? I think that's a big question. Okay, well, that's possession. I don't know if we need to say any more.
Can I just ask one?
Yes.
Because that really, your notion that the nurse has to, or doctor has to cure something, so they create sickness in order to be able to cure. That really explains some dynamics that I've been familiar with. But, when your statement on we don't make projections just happen.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that so the self is something's happening, something's doing it, like the world soul or the world psyche or the self or something. That's who's orchestrating all this. Okay. So then really our focus is, if the nurse or the doctor could just, it's going to happen. It's inevitable. the world soul is doing this. So the best we can do, really, is to become aware of them.
Mm-hmm.
And to always be tuned into that phenomena that's inevitable. So in this situation, if the nurse would become aware that that's a possibility of projection going on, then they would have the opportunity to stop.
And to withdraw into themselves. That's always, we'll get back to these steps in projection, but first to recognize it, and then to own it, and then to serve it.
So then it could transform from a power issue to a, I want to heal. I want to.
Or maybe I need healing.
Or maybe I need.
And maybe I should be more vocal about my own needs, for example. Yeah, I would say, with carefully say, I think the statement, the complex projects, is more accurate. Now, where it gets complicated is, and I think we'll probably get to it eventually, but I alluded to it earlier, but let's go back through it. If you really are paying attention to this stuff, and you realize, well, I made that, I say it incorrectly, but this projection happened, I understand it, I integrate it. This projection happened, I understand it, I integrate it. You will see over time that they form a pattern. And it's like the projections over time are trying to lead you somewhere. So that I would say the self is behind the complex's projections. Very often, at least. And that's a big difference between Freud and Jung. Freud is saying projections are defenses. Jung is saying projections are the means of coming to consciousness. And it's saying almost the same thing. But the difference is that projections over time have this teleological connection, as if there's an intelligence leading them somewhere. So, even though it feels like a moral defeat each time you have to face one, often they are leading you somewhere. And I think that's one of the reasons why she wrote this book, to make us aware, oh, this little simple definition, look how broadly it can apply. And then I think this is where she is saying about these spirits, going back to the spirit bit, where I just said earlier, well, does the disease in the body project itself onto the doctor? I made that sound like a purely psychological statement. But could it be that there really is a spirit that is dancing between the two people? And that we don't know. But she introduces that question just, again, to enlarge our questioning of what projections are.
Could there be a spirit dancing between the two
people? Yeah, I mean, could there really be a spirit?
That's guiding these two, but it's got two people involved.
Right.
And it's guiding.
Or it might not, at that moment, it might not be guiding, it might be trying to destroy both people.
Is this the last paragraph here?
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm. From the psychological point of view, it is clear that in all these cases, the spirit is regarded as not belonging to the personality of the sufferer. He belongs to an objective outer world that is somewhere visibly or invisibly present, as is likewise the case with the good spirits which manifest themselves. Again, we don't know. I know it sounds flaky, but she's just trying to keep the question open at its broadest. And I think I told you that Vanderpost story where they shot the animal in the territory where the guides told them do not do it, and then everything fell apart. They almost died. Their car broke down. Their water jug got a hole in it. I mean, just one thing, flat tire, hole in the gas tank, just one thing after the other. So, was there a spirit? And just like, I know I'm taking this a bit further, but now the book's going to take the argument a bit further. Okay, I see my friend. I say to my friend, you're a creep. And my friend is a creep, but I'm a creep too. And so I'm projecting my creep onto my friend. And so just because I say I'm projecting doesn't mean that my friend isn't what I'm projecting onto. Well, the same thing could be true for spirits. I may be projecting onto that spirit, but there may really be a spirit there that I'm projecting onto. How do we know? Well, we don't know. And she's not trying to reach any conclusion, just raise up the question. Was there something in that woman who literally jumped inside my body? It sure felt like it, I can tell you that. I couldn't move my neck for a week. It was that strong. Could have been a projection, purely psychological, or there could have been, the complexes could be something that we don't really understand. We say they're psychological, but maybe they're psychological and more. Maybe they have an objective existence somewhere. She's just raising that question, that's all.
Well, in the case of that Vanderpool example, then she's also raising, it would also raise the question of there might be some lodged in animals.
Right, absolutely.
And if we kill the wrong animal at the wrong time,
absolutely,
that spirit is released to do other harm.
Mm-hmm. For our practical psychological purposes, I don't think it really matters because we are saying you have to withdraw the projection into yourself, whether it's a real spirit or whether you're just imagining spirits. But she's just wanting not to be pinned down to say, oh, this is a completely psychological argument.
Well, and then the ones we can't, because they're from the self, we can't integrate.
Or we can integrate them, but integrate them back into the self. And that's another kettle of fish. Try to think of an example. Well, I think maybe the simplest example would be if you admire an artist and you have artistic capacities. We know creative inspiration comes and goes. It's not something you can say, well, I'm going to sit down today and paint a brilliant painting. You're either seized with the desire and capacity to paint well that day or you want. See, that's the non-ego aspect. So to integrate that artist into yourself would mean recognizing the creative voice in yourself that you have to get along with and who may give you inspirations or not, depending on whether it's happy with you or not. So integrating would mean knowing you have this creative spirit and then hearing what its terms are for it to be beneficial to you. But you will never be able to sit down and say, well, today I'm going to paint a brilliant picture. What you have to do is say, okay, inner spirit, inner inspirer, you haven't spoken to me for a couple of weeks. What do you need to speak?
Well, I think there's a lot more to it than whether or not that spirit's happy with you, too. It can be a factor of the qualities of the time that you're trying to create in. There's something that the spirit wants you to create, and yet the time qualities aren't appropriate, so you'll have to wait. And the spirit won't speak.
Okay, but the thing you mentioned, which is so important from my point, is the spirit speaks. You don't speak. The spirit speaks. So withdrawing a projection from the artist is realizing you have that spirit in you, and it's going to put demands on you. See the difference? Where I might be a very passive person, and admire an aggressive person. Well, I can learn to be aggressive on cue. That's integrating into the ego. But I can never be creative on cue. That's
it's the control factor.
That's the control factor.
I was getting, at the beginning you said unintegratable, and I was just getting
Oh,
hung
did I
up
say
on
that?
word. Yeah. Like, the projections are either integratable or unintegratable. Integratable would be...
Integratable into the ego or not integratable into the ego.
Oh, I just got mixed up on that term.
Yeah. It's a weird...
Control, it's the control.
It's the control. Can you control or not? Yeah.
I'm having trouble with this nurse thing, and I don't want to go back over it, but I have personal experience of a woman who was a hypochondriac and looked for a disease for years, literally. She went to many doctors who said, you're fine, there's no problem, blah, blah, blah. She finally ends up with diabetes, heart disease, and finally Alzheimer's.
Wow.
So she finally got her diseases because she needed taken care of. Can we project upon ourselves these diseases?
That's a big problem. Or did she really get sick and her hypochondria was intuiting that she could be sick?
Right.
These are, remember I talked about feeling as judgments? This would be something you'd have to decide by feeling. Remember the case of the guy with the stair phobia? Did I talk about that? Jung tells a story of a patient of his who had a phobia of stairs. I know we talked about it here one time, long ago. A phobia of stairs, and they couldn't get rid of it. And so they finally gave up, and the guy went to South America, got caught in a coup, and was running up a set of stairs and got struck by a bullet and was killed. Had he not run up a set of stairs, he probably would have survived. So that phobia, Jung was saying, knew in advance of this historical event. So did your person know in advance, your sister-in-law know in advance what was coming? It's terribly difficult.
And then, do you work on that complex or not? And that's a balance, as well. That getting rid of his phobia of stairs may have caused him to run up those stairs, and then led to his death.
Yeah, not respecting his phobia led him to run up the stairs, was Jung's point. Or I know Jung tells another case of a guy who was convinced he had cancer and had been through medical tests, and was proved negative. And Jung said, yes, you do have a cancer. It's in your soul, not in your body. And then they worked on it that way, successfully. So this is the art of the work. I tell you an example of mine, which is kind of humiliating, but it's unfortunately true. September 11th, about 10 years ago, I was talking to a woman who had a history of schizophrenia. She walked in. She said, New York is blowing up. They're flying airplanes into buildings. People are fleeing out of the city. The city is burning. Oh my God, she's having a psychotic episode. But it was true. Yeah. I was thinking that's a projection. It was no projection. And she was pissed, never came back. She wanted to turn on the TV, and I kind of patronized her, and she got really furious, and rightly so. But what would you think? Who thinks of people flying airplanes into buildings?
I went into my boss's office. I was working for them, and told him this was happening, and some of us were watching on television in one of the agent's office, and he just blew me off. He had work to do, and I'm telling him this crazy thing. He finally came down, but just so unbelievable what it could make.
Okay. That was spirits.
Gary, can we go back up that page just a little bit?
Yeah.
When it's talking about middle of the first paragraph, wherever sickness is explained as a result of invasion of the patient by a spirit, the most frequent form of therapy consists of transferring the spirit either to a healer who spits it out and annihilates it, or onto an animal which is sacrificed as soon as it is seized by the spirit, which is kind of the idea of a scapegoat.
Scapegoat, yeah.
But also within groups, people become the scapegoats. And how do you deal with those projections, or is that a different?
Well, it's harder if 10 people say one thing and one person says another. I think this is the, I'm not up on family therapy, but from what I know of systems theory, this is what they say, that one person in the group knows what's going on, one person knows, and that's the person who's being tortured. So,
like the black sheep of the family.
Like the black sheep, yeah.
There's a movie called The Conspirator, and it's just a really interesting psychological situation where when President Lincoln was killed, the lady who had a boarding house that boarded Booth and his conspirators, she got put on trial too, and not by a civil jury. It was a military tribunal. And just all the things that happened, I mean, there wasn't really any much information, proof that she was involved. She was just trying to protect her son.
Like a witch hunt.
And yeah, so she ended up saying, it's a real good example, I think, of that scapegoating. And of course, the military, they had the mind of, they needed to find a scapegoat to satisfy the country's thirst for that. And,
it's so much harder to deal with when the numbers are against you. And really, I think this is why AA works, because there's more people telling the person who's projecting that they're projecting than there are people who are projecting. That's why individual work doesn't work with addicts. It takes 10 people saying you're full of crap for the person to listen. And even then, sometimes they don't listen. But one person can't get through, because there's 10 people in themselves saying, no, I'm not an addict. But and it's what nations do to each other. So I don't think there's a simple answer, but some therapies are geared to present that ganging up with a gang. So it's gang versus gang. Okay, happy so far? Well, let's take a break, because 1 hour that's successful.